Our next presenter is Bronwen Black, who's also in a few minutes going to be finished with her Bachelor of Arts, hard to believe. Bronwen didn't have to travel quite as far as Sharon, at least physically, but she's going to be talking about her fine work with the Victoria Kool-Aid Society.
How does this work?
Once you're on, you just click.
Okay. Oops, sorry. Hi, everyone. As Lynn said, my name is Bronwen. I'm a student of the Health and Community Services undergraduate program, and it's a pleasure to be here. Today I'll be presenting my case study of a data analysis project with Victoria's Kool-Aid Society. For those of you who don't know of Kool-Aid, Kool-Aid works with partners in the community to help house, reduce harm, and promote health for the marginalized and homeless individuals of Victoria. Kool-Aid's mission is to ultimately end homelessness by 2018. My placement with Kool-Aid was with the Community Relations Department. This department acts as a liaison between the community and Kool-Aid. They're fundraisers, advocates, and a wealth of information on everything Kool-Aid. I don't think I could list on both hands all of the wonderful things this department does. My case study was based on a report that I was asked to develop for the department. To create this report, I first needed to identify an objective for it. I then needed to secure the health of the database, as that would be the data that I would later be analyzing. I then needed to extract relevant data from the database, relevant to my objective, analyze the data, and then research and develop a set of recommendations based on my findings. With the guidance of my supervisor, I decided that the objective of the report would be to evaluate the effectiveness of past calls to action. A call to action can be anything from a phone call to an email to an event, but for the purpose of my case study, I focused on emails sent between 2011 and 2013. Each call to action has a purpose, a reason that it's sent. The email would be trying to induce a response from the recipient to the purpose of the email, the call to action. Prior to beginning my analysis, I decided that I wanted to use both descriptive and inferential statistical tests to analyze the data. I also decided I would need to conduct a literature review to inform my later recommendations for the report. In order to secure the health of the data that I would be later using for my analysis, I first needed to learn how to navigate Kool-Aid's database. Here's a screenshot that gives you an idea of my daily database adventures during the early period of my case study. Using reports and query functions, I was able to identify and correct errors in the data. This took 2 to 3 weeks, actually. Next, I exported relevant data from my database into Excel in the form of a raw data sheet. For those of you who have worked with raw data before, you know that it's full of rich information, but that it's also full of a lot of unnecessary information. Thus, with the patient guidance of my supervisor, I learned how to use Excel formulas and extract specific, pertinent data that I could later analyze. So now, after doing all that, I finally got to the fun, juicy stuff. Now that I had my set of relevant data, I was able to begin my analysis. So there were 32 calls to action sent between 2011 and 2013. To analyze these calls to action, I opted to classify each one as a period beginning when the email was sent and up to 28 days afterwards. This way, I could analyze the responses from each call to action within a reasonable time frame. The descriptive statistical method that I used compared the number of gifts and the sum of gifts to the purpose to each call to action with the number of gifts and the sum of gifts in total during each period. This gives you an example of what I mean by that, because I'm sure it sounds a little confusing. This is an example of the ratios from 2013. The x-axis represents the periods from the year, and the y-axis represents the ratio level from each period. So numbers aside, we can see from this chart that some periods had a much higher ratio of gifts to the purpose than others. This suggests that some calls to action were more effective in getting a response to their specific purposes than others. After examining the ratios, I conducted a correlation coefficient statistical test to identify whether there is a linear relationship between the number of days from when the call to action was sent and the size of gifts made to the purpose. Here's an example of a strong correlation. The x-axis represents the number of days after the call to action was sent, and the y-axis represents the sum of gifts. So here we see that the larger gifts were made right after the call to action was sent. Again, this suggests that this was a more effective call to action. After conducting my analysis, it became clear that there were some calls to action that were simply more effective than others. I read through all of the emails, and there were similarities between the ones that were more effective. If the email had content that appealed to a reader's emotions, or if it listed a recent campaign success, then they were more effective than emails that did not. I also saw that some purposes consistently had a higher response from donors, which could suggest a preference of some kind by the donors for specific purposes. And of course, I noted that emails sent around the holidays incited more gifts. After conducting a literature review, I developed a number of recommendations for Kool-Aid to improve their current strategy. Some of these included improving understanding of the donors, so understanding the donor base that they currently have, designing calls to action based on that knowledge specific to those donors' needs, enhancing the database, so continuing monitoring and advancing that, and revisiting the current solicitation strategy, so maybe changing things altogether. Thank you to everyone for your time and interest, and a special thanks to my supervisor. Oh, and thanks to Betty as well.
Any questions for Bronwen? I also want to add that through Bronwen's project, I was able to find a source, an online source to explain how to do Excel, and I had been looking for literally years for it, and there it was in her presentation. So I love it when the learning goes both ways. Thank you, Bronwen.
You bet. Thank you.